Okay, welcome everybody to the SFU Sports Analytics Virtual Seminar Series, Episode 12. Today we have Dr. Ivan Bajic and Timothy Woinoski, who are going to speak to us today about automated swimming analytics using deep neural networks. Dr. Bajic is a professor of engineering science at SFU and co-director of the SFU Multimedia Lab. His research interests are in signal processing and machine learning with applications in multimedia signal processing, compression, communications, and computer vision. He recently became involved in sports analytics through the work of his students and is currently in the process of becoming a more educated sports fan, which is always music to our ears. Tim Woinoski is completing his bachelor's degree in computer engineering at SFU. He's been working with Ivan's research group in the Multimedia Lab for the last 16 months. And he has presented his work at the 2020 AAI workshop on artificial intelligence in team sports. Tim is a former varsity athlete with the SFU men's swim team, for which he competed in many NCAA Division II and Canadian national championships over his career. And so their topic today, again, it's automated swimming analytics using deep neural networks. So computer vision has become a popular tool for data collection in sports analytics, especially in big money sports. In the first part of the talk, they will briefly review a few basic concepts from computer vision and its use in sports. They will also introduce the main workhorse of modern computer vision, which is deep neural networks, a type of machine learning approach. In the second part of the talk, they will present preliminary work using a deep neural network based swimming analytics system whose goal is to extract a host of useful swimming metrics, such as stroke metrics, breaths taken, distance off the wall, and kicks off the wall from a video recorded by a single uncalibrated moving camera. The current vision of the system is able to detect and track individual swimmers, extract videos of individual swimmers, and count their strokes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bajic to share his screen. I'm just going to stop sharing mine.
All right. Thanks very much, Dave, for the introduction, and thanks for inviting us to present in this seminar series. I hope everybody can see the shared screen now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the talk will have two parts. I'll present the introductory, but the easy part, the introductory part, just a few basics of computer vision and deep learning or deep models, which are the main workhorse of computer vision nowadays. And then in the second part, Tim will go a bit more into the details of the system that he's been developing for the past 16 or so months. So briefly, the goal of computer vision is to make computers understand visual data in a way that humans do. Not to say that the goal is to replicate every kind of step of processing exactly as it happens in the human vision and human brain, but to achieve similar sort of input-output inference results. So some of the typical computer vision problems are things like edge detection, corner detection. Those would be examples of the so-called low-level computer vision. And then going on in increasing order of sophistication, things like face detection, object segmentation, person recognition, emotion recognition, pose estimation, activity recognition, and so on. So those are the kinds of things that you would see, the kinds of problems you would see being attacked and to some extent solved in, computer vision papers. The typical computer vision processing pipeline up to about 8 to 10 years ago used to sort of look like this. The input to the system would be an acquired digital image, which would then be subject to analysis to find certain characteristic elements called features that we believe are useful in making the kind of inference, solving one of those problems that I've mentioned at the previous slide. So on the example here on the right, you'll see little red circles, and if you look carefully, there's some blue lines as well. So those are certain kinds of feature, in this particular case called SIFT features, and they used to be quite popular in computer vision up until recently. And one characteristic of these and many other features that have been developed in the past was that they were handcrafted. So somebody would kind of write down a set of equations of what they believe is important in an image to kind of solve an inference problem. And the processing pipeline would try to sort of extract those features and then analyze them further. So upon some further feature processing and analysis, we may be able to make an inference as the one shown at the bottom below, where we have detected two trees in this input image. So this type of computer vision worked very well in a research lab. You'll see many papers with fancy results from that period up to about 10 years ago. But it was hard to take outside the research lab. What people used to find is that if you were to deploy a system like this out in the wild somewhere, the variations in image appearance, things like variations in illumination, noise, color differences, various compression artifacts, as well as just basic sensitivity to assumptions, made it difficult to deploy this in all cases except very controlled ones, kind of lab-like conditions. Examples where computer vision was successful in the past were things like document processing. You would scan a document and then do things like optical character recognition, fingerprint processing, industrial machine vision, medical image analysis. So all cases where you have a lot of control over the image acquisition process, perhaps control over the noise and other impairments that may be observed in these images, as well as cases where you know exactly what you're looking for, like in industrial machine vision, maybe you're monitoring a conveyor belt with certain industrial parts being moved there, and you kind of know the shape that you're looking for, and you might be looking for defects or things like this. So highly constrained conditions did enable this earlier incarnation of computer vision to be used in practice. And it also made its way into some sports. So I'm going to show a few examples that everyone has probably seen. So one of the early success stories of computer vision in sports was this system called Hawkeye, which is used in tennis and a few other sports. And basically in tennis, it has reached the point where it can now overrule the linesperson's call. If a player challenges a call, the Hawkeye decision is taken as the final. On the right-hand side, you see the system, actually what's going on behind the scenes. So what the system looks like. These things around the court are cameras, and then a few computers and so on are shown here. So as you can see here, you've basically turned the stadium into a lab to make this work, right? So so that sort of puts some sort of barrier as to who can use this kind of system. Another example that's quite cool is Intel TrueView. So I've linked a YouTube video here. I'm going to play it, and I just want to move past the advertisements to where some of the action is. So this system can sort of synthesize a virtual viewpoint from a position where we have no cameras and make it look like, you know, there is a camera spinning around, you know, a player or a certain, you know, action on the court. But again, to make this happen, you know, you have to turn your stadium into a research lab. So a number of well-calibrated cameras and a lot of processing power behind the scenes to sort of make this happen. So more recently, in the last 10 or so years, the typical computer vision pipeline has changed. So we still take an image as an input to the pipeline, but now instead of doing all this handcrafted feature extraction and processing, we feed the image into a so-called deep vision model, or a neural network that has lots of parameters inside, and let it do feature extraction and feature analysis the way it thinks it should be done. And the end result is inference, again, like it was before. But if the model is properly trained, in other words, if you've trained it with lots of examples of input-output pairs, it seems like this processing pipeline is now more ready to go outside of the research lab, less sensitive to assumptions, more able to handle cases that we didn't model or didn't know how to model before. So this is what computer vision looks like today. And here's an example of a system that I believe somewhere in the background uses at least one of these deep models. The example again comes from YouTube, and it's from Sport Logique. And as they mentioned, I guess we'll hear a talk from them at some point in the future. So I look forward to learning what's actually behind the scenes here, because I'm not sure, but I'm just guessing that they are using at least one deep model, perhaps for player detection and tracking somewhere in the background. You'll see that the let's move. Yeah. Okay. So you'll see that the players are being tracked here, and there's some spatial analysis done on the players to infer the position and I guess possible actions and so on and so forth. So this kind of processing is much more difficult compared to, well, in some sense, more difficult compared to the systems that I presented before, because you can see that this is all done based on the broadcast video from a moving camera, which means that it's very likely uncalibrated relative to the court, and traditional computer vision wouldn't be able to do much in a case like this. But as we can see now, we're able to do a lot more. An example of a deep vision model that may have been used in this example I've shown, and certainly the kind of model that we've used in our work that Tim will talk about later on, is shown here. This model is called YOLO version 3. And these colored blocks here are various processing blocks within the model. The details are not that important, but it's worth mentioning that each block on its own is relatively simple. But when you stack a bunch of them together and create a model with millions of parameters, it can do really cool things. And so the goal of this model is to actually detect objects in the input image. So an input to the model is over here, and after doing some overall complicated processing, at the output we would get things like locations or bounding boxes for the objects, as well as object categories. So for example, in this case, the model has detected a dog. There could have been a cat, a bicycle, and so on and so forth. The version of the model that Tim has trained was trained to detect swimmers in the pool, and he's going to go through some of the details of it later on. And we can see here that there's like 3 stacks of these beige blocks over here, showing that the model is doing something called multi-scale processing to be able to detect objects of different sizes. So there are many different architectures of deep models, but common to all of them is that you no longer have to handcraft these features that you believe are relevant. If you have a large enough number of examples of inputs and desired outputs, there are ways to tune all the parameters of the model to give you those desired outputs. And the result seems to be more robust compared to earlier pipelines to these unmodeled, unknown elements in the image. So that leads me to the sort of last slide here, and I'm just going to take a moment to mention the goal of this work that Tim has been doing, and I guess in a broader picture that a number of other groups have been doing, is towards democratizing sports analytics. And it seems like that with these deep vision models, that's now becoming more possible. The key point is that they are showing the kinds of robustness that you would need to take computer vision outside of the research lab. So there might not need, there may not be any need to turn your sports stadium into a research lab to make use of this. However, it's not, this approach is not without its challenges. These models need a lot of data to be trained on. And so the challenge is now to sort of incentivize community to contribute data for the kinds of sports and kinds of analytics that one would be interested in doing. So that brings me to the end of part one. This seems to be a natural break. So if there are any questions, happy to take them now. And if not, we may move on to part two.
Great, thanks, Ivan. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please just unmute and ask away. And then otherwise, we'll just move on to part two. So I'll just give it a few seconds here.
Ivan, I've got a quick question, if I may. This is Chris Napier. I'm just wondering if it would be conceivable to fuse data from wearable devices. So let's just take heart rate, for instance, and sort of tag it to players on a field so that you have, you're able to fuse the sports vision data with wearable data.
Very, very cool idea. I don't see why not. I mean, not to say that it would be easy, but I think the fact that these deep models offer you a way to sort of avoid explicit modeling of the relationship of, visual appearance and, tracking device measurements, they could infer and figure out those relationships on their own, assuming you have enough data to tune these parameters. I think it's quite feasible. There are examples of kind of multimodal models. Audio-visual are the common example because those modalities are quite easy to record together in a synchronized manner. But there are cases out there that show that this cross modality analysis is quite possible, maybe more possible with these types of models than it used to be before. So yeah, that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thanks,
Chris. Any others? Okay, so let's maybe have Tim share his screen then and proceed with part two.
All right. Hello guys. Can everybody see my screen? Or
I can. It looks good to me.
looks good. The right part of the screen. Nice. All right. Thanks, Yvonne. That's very cool. And so now we've talked about an overview of computer vision using deep neural networks. I'm going to go into the details of using this technology to analyze swimmers and collect swimming analytics automatically in the field, maybe with a non-lab-like type situation. So that would mean no humans in the loop automatically and in a large scale. And I'll go over the details of each of the sections. We'll start off with an introduction to swimming analytics. And then we'll talk in depth swimmer detection, swimmer tracking, and stroke estimation. And then we'll briefly talk about some future work. So for swimming, there's a simple rule. Basically, all swimmers need to minimize their drag and maximize their force output. It's that simple. For something like a fighter jet, it's very easy to measure drag. And well, not very, but relatively easy to measure drag and also measure force. And as you can see, a fighter jet is quite optimized for both. It's a jet engine with wings, essentially. For swimming, it's a little harder to measure such parameters. We have to approximate these measures because the swimmers aren't always static. They're moving, they're turning, they're diving. So we create a bunch of metrics to model swimmer ability. One of the most classic is swimming speed as a measurement of, or as a result of swimmer stroke rate and swimmer length. Much like a bicycle, if you're If you bring up the gears, you can take less strokes and go at the same speed. The other way also works. Here's some other common swimming metrics that kind of approximate a swimmer's ability. Stroke length and stroke rate we talked about. Race time, very common, already collected. Race splitting also collected. Breath counts. Underwater kicks off the wall is a good metric for turns and stuff that we don't really see at all. Reaction time off the blocks. Distance off the wall and underwater speed are all things that kind of approximate a swimmer's ability. So we'd like to collect those using something like this.
2, Tanner Cummings, University of Louisville, and 3, Nick Zito, Western Club, in 4, Sun Devil Swimming's Cody Bybee, Tyler Zeus, and Carter Swift in 5, 6, and 7, Gabriel Orby, Scarlet Aquatics in lane 8.
So most of our swimmer analytics data is encoded in this video here. We have to extract it. So currently an organization called Racetech does this. It's rather expensive and it's not all that fast, but it gets the job done. Unfortunately, due to these constraints, only top performing athletes generally get this race report. And there's a couple problems with that. It's hard for large scale analytics. We can't identify young swimmers as easily because we haven't analyzed them, and we can't identify any important metrics because our sample is only really good swimmers. So the insights are rather short-sighted, not to say that they're useless. They're incredibly useful for analyzing a particular athlete, what they could improve on, but we're more interested in a larger scale. So moving on, we'd like to overcome these issues. So there's a couple of approaches that other groups have done to automatically collect some analytics. So from the Center for Sports Engineering Research at Sheffield Ham University, they produced a product called iSwim, which has not been released to the public, but basically uses a subtraction and camera calibration to detect a swimmer and find their velocity. Another group produced 2 papers, one called Swimmer Localization from a Moving Camera, and the other called Understanding and Analyzing a Large Collection of Archived Swimming Videos. Basically, they use these handcrafted features that Yvonne was talking about to detect a swimmer in a swimming scene. They also use proposed region of interest, which basically means it requires a human to use, and it produces really good results. The only issue is that they're not very scalable. So you can't, if this was calibrated for one pool, it wouldn't work very well for another. Another work, which is kind of the focus of today, is continuous video to simple signals for stroke detection with CNN. So basically what this does is it tracks swimmers and it counts their strokes using deep neural networks. It basically assigns a value to a single frame, and that value is from 0 to 1. And if you train it correctly and you feed it all the frames, it should produce a sinusoid, and then you just simply count the peaks of the sinusoid, and those are the time points of when a stroke occurs and the number of strokes you've taken. So here is, based on the work that I've shown you guys, we've proposed our own system for swimmer detection. It's scalable, so you can add, not swimmer detection, but swimming analytics. It's scalable, so you can add more modules, and you can improve upon it, and it will improve the whole system. So we start off with swimmer detection from race footage. We take the output of swimmer detection, we do some tracking, then the output of this tracking is sub-video. And we can do all sorts of things such as breath detection and stroke estimation, or figuring out where a stroke is. So starting off with swimmer detection. As Yvonne mentioned, we are using the YOLO V3 detection system to find swimmers in a swimming scene. Amongst all of its many benefits, it is fast, so that was one of the things we chose it for. In terms of the data and the classes used for detection, we decided that swimmers should be split up into 6 different classes, and this is based off of the paper Swimmer Localization from a Moving Camera. Basically, these classes form a basis for all possible swimming in a swimming sequence. I'll introduce each of the classes. On the top left-hand corner, we have finishing, Next is diving. Then we have swimming. On the bottom left-hand corner, we have turning, on the blocks, and underwater. So those are all of our classes, and we basically use them to train our detector. So there is no data. There's no set of boxes for swimming sequences available, at least that I know of, to the public. So we collected our own. We chose 35 videos of swimming from one single pool, which we denote as Bloomington, which we got off the Swim USA Productions YouTube page. On the right, you can see the breakdown of the data distribution of classes. I'd also like to note that we annotated every 3 frames. As video is highly redundant, it would be a lot of work to annotate every frame, and also potentially not the most useful. So we annotated every 3 frames, and an annotation is a box around a swimmer. The result, all of these annotations, is only 3,000 frames. Additionally, we tried to balance these classes out, but as diving takes 0.3 of a second of the entire race sequence, it's hard to get a relatively balanced swimming data distribution.
Hey, Tim, just got a couple of clarification questions from
For sure.
Bailey Monroe. So they ask, did you have to create your own implementation of YOLO v3, or what library are you using? And secondly, is the classifications of on blocks, diving, swimming, etc. hand annotated?
All right, so the first question is, what framework essentially do we use for YOLO?
The implementation, yeah.
Implementation? Yeah, so we use the DarkNet, DarkNet framework. So yeah, just out of the box, we didn't do anything special with it. And what was the next question? Sorry.
It's okay. The classifications, so on blocks, etc., are they hand annotated? Like you classified by hand what the swimmers were doing in each frame?
Yeah, I did that. All me. Took quite some time. I actually wrote my own program to speed it up and make it a little bit more efficient. I also wrote a paper on how to classify a swimmer in a swimming sequence. So there's a couple of grade points from when they're off the block to in the air, and from when they're in the air to in the water. So I defined those in that paper as well. So yeah.
Great, thanks.
Okay. So based on our with our data we collected, we did a few experiments. So basically, because we figured that we'd be annotating a lot of video, we wanted to see how could we collect data from video more efficiently. So what we did was we trained a bunch of YOLO v3 models using progressively less and less percentage of the collected data, until our models performed horribly because they had no data to train from. And basically we found the pseudo-optimal amount of data to collect from a video in order to save our time, but also have a good detector. That turns out to be roughly 20% of the data we collected, or annotating video at 30 frames per second once every 15 frames. Another nice thing about this experiment is that it shows that the detection system works. I mean, it's able to detect swimmers with some accuracy. You'll notice that the not swimming classes, the classes that aren't containing swimming, perform way better than the swimming. This is based on an average precision of 50. So the intersection over union of two detections between the ground truth and the predicted have to be 50 or better in order for this to work. If you reduce this to 25, swimming actually does very well. It does more like 80 on the AP scale. So basically that tells us that the detector has problems localizing a swimmer. We'll go on. So on for swimming tracking, we've taken the detection output, and now we'd like to basically map them across frames. And that's essentially tracking. So that's also known as tracking by detection. And I'll give a quick example. So you have 3 swimmers in one frame green, blue, and red, and we'd like to figure out those same swimmers in the next frame. So we use an association algorithm that kind of maps them to the next frame. Additionally, we wouldn't like our association algorithm to match things that don't exist in the previous frame, so that's why we're not connecting anything to the yellow swimmer in the next frame. And then we do this again for the frame after that, and we would like to be able to stop an association if the blue swimmer doesn't appear in the n+1 frame. That's essentially tracking by detection in a very simple way, and we go on like that. So an association algorithm that we used is a simple online real-time tracker. Shows it for its speed and simplicity. It also uses an additional amount of information, which is motion estimation. We know that a swimmer in a frame is going to be very close to the swimmer in the next frame. So we take advantage of that. So we make this thing called a swimmer state, which allows us to estimate where a swimmer might be in the next frame using their position, how fast they're traveling in terms of pixels, and how their box is changing in terms of pixels. And we'll just give you an example in the next slide. So let's say we have a swimmer, and I haven't shown you, well, this is a swimmer estimation using motion estimation. There would be 8 of these because there's 8 swimmers, but I'm only showing you one because it would get messy. And just because we know the swimmer state, we can estimate where the swimmer might be in the next frame. So we do that, and now we'd like to check how good that was. So we'll show you guys the next frame. So it does a pretty good job, but we also have a detection that we'd like to associate from the previous frame. So we show that, and the detection and the estimation overlap pretty good. So we'll say that those two are the same. And so we use this thing called the Kalman filter to merge these two data points, or these two estimations, into an even better estimation. And that would be the black box seen here. Here are all the swimmers, so you can see that this gets quite messy. Sometimes our detector doesn't always detect a swimmer. As you can see in the bottom, the referee got in the way and the swimmer wasn't able to be detected. So in that case, we just use the estimation. The problem with estimation is it can be prone to drift, so we can't just use it forever. Eventually we'll have to stop. And as you notice, the problem with detection is it can be less accurate, and so we use them both to produce an even better association result. So with the trajectories created by our sort algorithm, we would like to create little sub videos for our stroke estimation algorithm to work with. So basically, it's pretty simple. You just take all the trajectory frames and you stitch them together to make little sub frames, and you got a sub video. And you do this for every swimmer. And I'll show you an example in the next slide here.
Hey, Tim, just while that's playing, which is very impressive, there's a question from Patrick Meyerhofer. You said that you use videos from one pool, correct? How do you think your algorithm would work in different pools or from camera videos with different angles?
So in terms of the sort algorithm, we didn't even try that because the detection results were just not good. And in the next slide, we'll talk about how important detection is for this tracking. But it would perform poorly. Let's just say that. We need more data to make this better, as Yvonne talked or said. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we can talk more at the end. All right, so moving on, all this, basically what I showed you looks pretty cool, but we need to be able to quantify it. So we use 2 metrics from the Moat Challenge Dev Kit, which 2 of 17 actually. So I'm giving you the 2 most simple ones. MOTA, which is like a It's like an overall measurement of tracking, and MOTE-P, which is like a measurement of tracking precision. Essentially, it's how good a tracking is at localizing a swimmer. And these three results are from something like kind of like an Oracle tracker. It's not exactly an Oracle tracker. It's basically they're tracking detections from test results that have been trained by the detection system. So the detector does very well, like extremely well, and so the tracking does very well. In this last example here, we use test sequences that weren't used to train the detector, and our detection is significantly worse, which is no surprise. And as a result, our tracking drops significantly. And so we can conclude that the SORT algorithm needs pretty good detections to work properly. And so, so that's that. Moving on to stroke estimation in our proposed system. As I said earlier, the work that kind of motivated the work I'm presenting you today is by Victor and group. And basically they train a deep neural network to take a frame, and give it a value from 0 to 1. And if you push a bunch of frames through through this model, you should get a sinusoid, because that's how it was trained. And you would be able to detect strokes by basically finding the peaks of these sinusoids. The results were incredible, like they were very good. So what we're doing here is we're validating that an automated tracking system can still produce decent results. Once again, no data, not to us available. So we collected some. We collected data from the same pool that we did detection on, but we made sure that all of our test sequences for stroke recognition were not the same as our detection sequences. You can see the details of the events and stuff we used. So we have a broad range of events and genders, and so it's good data. We split this data 80-10-10, training, testing, and validation. And we use it for training our deep neural networks. So we proposed 3 architectures for assigning a value from 0 to 1 for a frame. Victor architecture, which is exactly the same as the one proposed in the paper that motivated this work. We also chose VGG16 backbone architecture. So the model is the model weights in the backbone are frozen, so those can't update. But the last layers are able to update in order to adjust for the task that we're interested in. Then we also propose a small architecture, which was basically, we were just trying to overfit it just to see what would happen. These models, you can see the training here. We're trained using mean absolute error. So if the model predicted something far away from the ground truth, it was punished. And if it produced something that was close to the ground truth, it was not. Something to note from this training, even though it doesn't look like it because the scales are a little bit different, the small model and the Victor model produced very similar, or converged to very similar mean absolute errors, whereas the VGG16 model was a little less so. With this result, we trained these models again, but we trained only the 35 epochs to avoid overfitting. And then we are going to test these models. Before we test them, we're going to design a process of how we would extract a swimmer stroke from a sequence of frames using this model. So we produce a signal using a bunch of frames put through the deep neural network, and we filter the sequence with a digital Butterworth filter with a 3 dB frequency of 3 Hertz. Basically, any frequencies lower than 90 strokes per minute are removed. 90 strokes per minute is way faster than any swimmer can maintain for that long. And based on this filtered signal, we threshold it. which basically turns the sequence into a square wave from 1 to 0. And basically the center of the sequence of ones indicates a stroke, as you can see in the image. And then you can see the results here with the stroke as a function for time for Victor graph. This is a very good result. They're not all this nice, but you can see it does a pretty good job. And I'll show you the summary of the results from the test sequences. I'd like to start off by saying that unfortunately we can't compare to the Victor paper because we used completely different test sequences, but we're still using their evaluation metrics. They give an F1 score, which basically combines precision and recall for to evaluate performance. For this metric, a stroke was predicted correctly if it was within 3 frames. Additionally, we also measure the results of this system using average stroke distance metric and a stroke distance standard deviation metric. Basically, an average stroke distance of 2 says that on average, the stroke was predicted within 2 frames of the ground truth. And in these results, it's interesting to note that the small architecture performs incredibly close to the Victor architecture, which wasn't expected. That was kind of just we didn't put a lot of effort into that one, and somehow it did very well. So that's kind of cool. Another thing to note is that for the most part, these models are able to predict strokes with a 1/15 of a second average error, which blows my mind if you ask me. Some of these models are very simple, and so it just kind of shows you how cool deep learning is. And of course, there's always room for improvement, but it's still pretty good. And now we'll just move on to work for the future. Essentially, we have our proposed system. The most important thing we can do to make this better is more data. We need a lot more data. Unfortunately, that takes time. So that's what I'll be working on in the future. We need more modules. So now it's great that we can predict strokes, but we'd like to be able to predict maybe breaths, and we might want to be able to figure out what a swimmer is in the lane. So that would be like position tracking, essentially, which is a little bit harder. We'd also like to improve our tracking just in general. So those are kind of related. I'd also like to talk about other applications of this work. Basically, I think computer vision for sports analytics is underestimated. I think it can be, if applied properly, very useful. IMUs seem to be very popular at the moment because they produce such great results. And a big issue with IMUs is they're not scalable. It's hard to put an IMU on every swimmer. It's easy to deploy one camera. And not just on swimmers either. You could do this for Olympic skiing or whatever, if you want to judge tricks or whatever. The 3D convolutional networks do a great job of assigning values to video. Incredible, actually, if you read a couple papers on that. But yeah, that's essentially work for the future. I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and Yvonne for being so supportive in my work. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Tim and Yvonne. And so I'm just going to ask you to stop sharing your screen and show the gallery view here. So I'll open the floor. Oops, start my video. Open the floor to questions. So I'll start with one that's in the chat box. So this is for Tim. Did you try doing swimmer detection with your network trained on a more general data set containing people? And did the data set need to specifically include swimmers?
I did not try on a general detection set for for people or whatever. I definitely, that would be an interesting experiment. My initial thought is that swimmers look nothing like normal people. They are in a totally different orientation. And from my experience with these detection systems, orientation is important. But yeah, it would be an interesting experiment.
Okay, great. So I'll just ask those of you listening. So if you have a question, please just post it in the chat box for now. And as we go along, I might just ask you to ask it outright. I've got a few clarification questions. So sorry for my lack of familiarity with this area, but so you talk about detection, I think, versus estimation. Could you just explain the difference between those two again? And maybe, if you want to go back to your slides on that, just to explain it, because I didn't quite catch the distinction between the two.
All right, so first I apologize. I probably tried to cram in more than I should have into this presentation. It's my bad.
It's all right. Errors of enthusiasm are always appreciated.
Yeah, well, thank you. So can you see the thing? The sword example?
Yep.
Oh, okay, so basically a detection in this example would be from the detector, from the YOLO V3 detector, and an estimation would be a motion estimation. So from the swimmer state, you know where the swimmer's centroid is, and you know where they're going by I think it's DU and U dot and V dot essentially. And so you just use basic physics, not physics, but the speed plus their a frame essentially, because this is in frames, and then you know where the position, you just add that to position. So if U was 1 and you know that the centroid was at 10, then the next frame it would be at 11.
Gotcha. Okay, so go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Maybe better to rephrase estimation here to prediction, because that's what it really is. The prediction is trying to kind of predict where the swimmer is going to be in the next frame, and then once the next frame comes in, you run this detector, and that's where you get these two boxes, and then there's a certain decision process to sort of merge the two into a better decision, right? So yeah. I would call estimation, I would rephrase that to prediction. Maybe that could clarify things.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the overall point here is that you've found that you kind of need both for this to perform optimally, correct?
Yeah, well, I haven't done a lot of other trying, but yeah, this is what the results of simple online real-time tracking kind of say. And basically, you could just use detections, and you could say, well, a detection is the same across frames if they overlap well. So say if we had a red box and an orange box, they were from 2 different frames. You could say they overlap because they must be the same because they overlap. Mm-hmm. But it can be a bit more complicated than that, and so this is what the motion estimation kind of is trying to encapsulate. Additionally, we have issues where the detector just doesn't work, so we would try to predict where the swimmer is without the detection.
Gotcha.
Yeah, if you had infinite confidence in your detector, this other component might not be needed. But as you can see, there could be a few frames where the detector just fails to detect anything, and you still have to keep tracking through that difficult segment. So that's where the need for the predictor comes in.
Great, thank you very much. That's really helpful. So I'm just going to move on to a couple of questions from the chat. So this is again from Patrick Meyerhofer. Tim, what is your solution for labeling the data? I believe that labeling each individual frame must be incredibly time consuming. How did you do it so far? And do you have any plans for the future to make it more efficient?
Yeah, so thus far I have, I designed my own annotation system that kind of makes things a little quicker. I think I tracked myself at an annotation or 2 annotations a second, I think, at one point. Or it could be the other way around, an annotation every 2 seconds. But anyways, I used a couple of methods, and I didn't mention that in this presentation, but I used an auto detector, basically. Given a box, it does a pretty good job of estimating the position of a swimmer in the next frame. It's basically like a very simple neural network. And I use that a lot for swimmer detection in terms of annotating swimmers. When it came to annotating swimmers at the wall and stuff, it didn't work as well. So I really did just annotate one box at a time. Luckily, another thing is that the swimmer class doesn't change too often, so I don't have to waste time changing classes if you set it up correctly. So yeah, you can, and also, well, the system I made just allows me to click twice, and that's one annotation, and it shows me the next frame, and you just annotate rapidly for each swimmer. So relatively optimized. And for the future, I would try to employ this. I need to refactor it a bit. It's a little messy, but I would try to employ it with a big group of people. So I'd make an annotation party for swimmers. I'd collect a bunch of video data, and I would, maybe we'll get some of the people on the swim team together, and we'll do some annotation, and then we have some more data.
I see. It sounds like a crowdsourcing effort, eh?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so Patrick, hopefully that answers your question. I'm just going to move on to Bailey Monroe. So UDOT would give you an estimate of instantaneous velocity. You could use the cycle centered on current frame or point of sine wave to produce perhaps an even better estimate of average cycle velocity. You could look ahead and report data as after analytics are not truly live. You could get stroke rate using frame period, especially important in fly where there is such a large variation of speed within the cycle. And the question is, have you explored any of these ideas? So Tim, you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, my bad. So yeah, no, I have not tried that. I didn't quite catch the whole gist of everything, but it sounds very.
So Bailey, perhaps Bailey could unmute and ask the question directly.
Sure, thanks, Dave. So basically just looking at some of the analytics of where you're going, I think you might actually have some of that already built in due to the nature of your system. Like you have UDOT, which you're going to use to generate your estimate of where the swimmer is going to be, or your prediction rather, as Ivan said. But you might actually have, because the analytics don't have to be truly live, you're able to kind of cheat and look ahead a couple frames so that you have an idea of where the real cycle's at. Your cycle frequency is just going to be your stroke rate. And then if you look at your UDOT average over the course of that entire cycle, so however many frames that is, I think you would actually have like an instantaneous speed measurement there and just built into your model already, so you wouldn't have to do anything else for that.
So are you referring to tracking, or are you referring to stroke estimation?
So I guess the information is just included in the tracker then, right? Because the stroke estimation itself, stroke rate, it doesn't require any physical knowledge of where the swimmer's at. You're simply going through that frame wave, right? Which when you have it bounded so that it's either at like 0 or 1, you can pretty reliably say that whenever you're hitting the first 1 or the first 0 on that thresholding, that you're hitting a new frame, and then whenever the time of that is, like relatively, you'd have your stroke rate like right away. I think that would be pretty easy for you to be able to implement. If that's somewhere you want to expand the model to include like rate.
Sorry, I'm still not quite understanding what you mean essentially.
That's okay. I'm just saying that I think that with the current metrics that you have, that you would be able to get some of the things that you want to get from where you're going.
All right. Thanks. Thank you. I think, yeah, there's definitely plenty of work to do on this. I don't quite want to do more work until I have more data. And currently I'm working somewhere else at the moment, so I can't do that yet. But once I'm a little bit more free, that will be my first task, and then we'll start really playing with some sneakier methods. This is kind of like a proof of concept and like a baseline, and then with a baseline you can kind of really start to compare different methods. Oh, this worked well, did not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the comments were really good. Maybe at some point, Tim, you can connect
For sure.
Bailey, and yeah, I think I see where this is going, and so I like these ideas, and I think that could be a useful addition to the system. So at some point we should talk more. So yeah, thanks, Bailey.
Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Next question is from Kevin Floyd. How much of the accuracy of the model depends precisely tagging the swimmers in the training data? Would inaccuracies in manually drawing the boxes around the swimmers make problems for the model?
Yes, definitely. I'm going to share my screen again. I'm sorry I keep on going back and forth.
Oh, not at all.
I have other plots here. Sorry. Basically, yeah, it does. Sorry, I can't find the plot I'm looking for. And you see it a lot with the swimmer detection results in this kind of plot here. If you change your AP tolerance, which is basically AP calculates how closely our detections are based on intersection over union. If you make it less strict, the swimming class goes way up. It performs very well, and that's because our data was created with an automatic annotator essentially, and so it wasn't the best data in the world. I won't lie. That'll be fixed later on when we have to annotate less frames because it will result in more human annotated. But yeah, we've noticed that things that were annotated not as well did not perform nearly as well in the detection system as compared to things that were more annotated by human. In terms of swimming, though, it is a relatively hard class to detect because the hands and arms are very small, especially in when they're only like 2 pixels across or whatever. So the detector really does have problems exactly localizing every part of the swimmer compared to a human.
Tim, could you show slide 10 maybe just for a few examples? There's also ambiguity, you know, how you annotate, because oftentimes you only see part of the body out of the water above the surface. And then the question is, would you look, if you look at the top left image there, would you annotate just the portion of the body that's visible, or would you stretch that box to include even the part that's not visible, right? And you know, that's some kind of annotation decision that needs to be taken ahead of time and then applied consistently, so that you know the model can learn what it needs to learn. And right, I'm not sure what conventions you've used, but there's a annotating isn't all that trivial, and different people could actually produce different annotations. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Luckily, the paper I wrote does detail all of this, all the way I annotated this. So you can look it up, and I will be using it in the future for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are no more questions in the chat box. If anyone has remaining questions, please unmute your microphone and just ask away. I'll wait for a few seconds, but otherwise I'll stop the recording in about 15 or 20 seconds or so. Okay, so it sounds like the audience doesn't have any more questions. So with that, I'm going to thank both of you again for a really insightful and interesting talk. Thanks, Tim, and thanks to Dr. Bajic. And best of luck for the future directions when you have the time, Tim, to get to it all. So it's a really cool system, and hopefully we'll see lots of advances in the future in this area. And thanks everyone for attending, and we will see you in January for our first set of talks on injury analytics. Take care, everybody.